Thank you for joining us here tonight for this really important conversation. Before we begin the program, we'd like to invite Mark Moseri, one of our leadership scholars, to please come up and lead us in a parak of Tehillim.
Shira tisana ehe ari ma'in yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai yoseh shamayim va'aretz. Hayiten lamot raglecha yanum shomrecha. Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha yad yeminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakechach v'yareach b'layla. Adonai yishmorach mikora yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzedcha uboecha me'ata ve'ad olam.
Thank you. I want to begin by first thanking our co-sponsors, the YU Center for Israel Studies and the S. Daniel Abraham Honors Program. I'm sure that you, when you saw this video like me just a few months ago, the recording of the group of protesters on the subway, when someone yelled out, "Raise your hand if you're a Zionist. This is your chance to get out." And when no one responded, the leader of the pack smiled and said, "Okay, no Zionists, we're good." How could no one stand up on that subway and object to that blatant anti-Semitism? As diaspora Jews, we have been challenged repeatedly throughout the last year to not stand idly by while anti-Semitism rages around us. We have marched, we have protested, we have spoken out, ensuring our voices are heard and our beloved homeland, Medinat Yisrael, is never erased. The Sacks-Herenstein Center is honored to be hosting tonight's conversation, Values in Conflict, Fight or Flight, Cultivating Courage on campus. Throughout this entire war, our center, together with many of our colleagues and students on campus, have been dedicated to motivating students to take action through rallies, tzedakah campaigns, tefillot, solidarity missions, and unity events here on campus. I want to welcome Terry and Andrew Herenstein. Oh, they just came in, perfect timing. The founders of the Sacks-Herenstein Center, and two people who have not stopped supporting, visiting, and volunteering in Israel since October 7th. Our guest speakers tonight will share about their own experiences being on their own front lines of this war. Two people whose writings and social media posts have inspired thousands of others to speak up and speak out. I am pleased to invite Barron Campus Student Government President Shalhevet Cohen to tell us a little bit more about our esteemed panelists.
Hi, my name is Shalhevet Cohen. I'm a senior studying finance, and I'm the BCSG president. Tonight's conversation is the first of two major events leading up to October 7th. The next will be on September 30th in the Lamper Auditorium to memorialize a year of war, suffering, protesting, and praying called Remembering October 7th Together. We'll hear from President Ari Berman, Nova survivor and YU student Tomer Meir, YC Stern and Sim students, local politicians, and community members. Rabbi Leibowitz will speak about faith after October 7th, and the Y Studs will lead us in song. Students will receive One Day in October, a book about Israeli heroes of October 7th, and busing will also be provided from Barron. For tonight's conversation, I'm honored to introduce our new Dean of Yeshiva College in Stern, Dr. Rebecca Cypess, who joined us from Rutgers University, where she served as a tenured professor of music and associate dean for academic affairs at Rutgers Mason Gross School of the Arts. She took an active role in combating anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias at Rutgers. Dr. Cypess is the author of 2 books, co-editor of 5 books, and author of over 45 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. Her work has also appeared in Lehr House, Tablet, Inside Higher Ed, and the Wall Street Journal. Dr. Shai Davidai is an assistant professor of business at Columbia Business School and has taken the world of social media by storm with his regular posts against anti-Semitism and the anti-Israel movement on campus. Professor Davidai received his PhD from Cornell University and did a year as a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University. He is widely published in journals of business and psychology. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Dr. Erica Brown, who is the Vice Provost for Values and Leadership at YU and the director of its Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center. Her forthcoming book is Morning Has Broken, Faith After October 7th. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. It's wonderful to see you here for this critical and important conversation. I'm so honored to be here with you both. So we'll start with you, Dean Cypess. Welcome. Wonderful to have you here this evening and here at YU. I'd love to start with you each telling us a little bit about yourselves. Dean Cypess, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you to the Sacks-Herenstein Center, and thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to be in conversation with Dr. Davidai, who has been an inspiration to so many of us this year. So, I guess, al regel achat, I thought I was going to be a musicologist in my career. I started on the faculty at Rutgers University in 2012 and sort of did all the things that you need to do to be promoted and get tenure. And I was sort of thrown into two things soon after I submitted my tenure portfolio in the fall of 2016. One was that I entered academic administration. There was sort of a crisis in my department, and there was a leadership vacuum, and someone needed to step forward. And that's how I started in academic leadership, and that's ultimately what has led me here at Yeshiva University. And the other thing that happened is that a colleague who had helped mentor me towards tenure, even though she was not in my field, she just gave a lot of her time to me, we decided that it would be very helpful at Rutgers if we started networking together with other Jewish faculty and staff. There had not yet been a lot of noise made around a possible BDS campaign or other kind of anti-Israel activities, but there were hints that things were brewing, and we thought it would be good just to know people, right, and to be connected, because when you have a community, it's much easier to be organized and to be effective. And so that was when we founded an organization called Rutgers JFAS, Jewish Faculty Administrators and Staff. Not a very original name, but there you go. It says what it is. And that group, so it's been in existence now for 8 years, and it works to combat anti-Semitic and anti-Israel bias on campus. I worked in academic administration within the music department at Rutgers for a few years, and then moved on to being associate dean of the School for the Arts. And as of September 2023, I felt like things were humming. I knew how to do my job. I was feeling good. I actually went back to teaching a little bit just because I missed the classroom. And
little did you know.
I had no idea. Obviously, nobody knew what was coming. But very soon after October 7th, obviously I was in shock, as everyone else was in shock, and I felt like I was having a lot of trouble kind of doing the basic functions of my job. But by the end of November, it was clear to me that, sort of whether I was fully present or not, it was not going to be possible for me to continue in academic administration. I told my dean at that point, the end of November, that I was going to return to the faculty, and thought that I would just sort of regroup from there, and continue the fight from there. And there were reasons that we can get into later why. A number of reasons why I felt like I couldn't stay in academic administration given everything that was going on campus. But then I saw this job posting at Yeshiva University at the end of December, and realized that that's where I at least had to try. So here I am. And here you are. Shai, Professor Davidai.
you've got a fascinating story, and I'm
Everybody
wondering,
knows about me, so you got.
Yeah.
It's like,
No,
who's
we
this
still
guy?
want to know about you. You share with me a story about your family and Adolf Eichmann. So I'm wondering if you could kind of start there and go from there, please.
Yeah. I will start by saying that I'm probably the least likely person to ever be invited to Yeshiva
Oh, no, you're
University
not.
to speak. Is it?
No, you're not.
Wait, give me an hour. No. And by the way, I think there's like about 100 people here, maybe a few less, but feel free to record video, quote, whatever, and send it to 100 more, just get the message out. But yeah, so I have a typical Israeli story. I was born and raised in Israel until I was 27 when I moved to the US. But in other ways, it's not typical. So my maternal grandparents came from Romania in the early 1950s. And there's a story there. From my father's side, my grandmother, she was brought to Israel when she was 5 years old by her family. In 1935, they lived through the siege in Jerusalem, was extremely poor. But my dad's dad, my grandfather, was actually born in Haifa in 1929. So, whenever people say history started in 1948, or there was no Jews around, I was like, well, my grandfather was there. And his dad came from Latvia, in the beginning of the 20th century. Was a salt miner. They lived in Atlit in a one-bedroom, a tiny, tiny, tiny place. My great-grandfather would travel to the Dead Sea, basically be a salt miner for 2-3 weeks at a time, come back to Atlit, spend the weekend, go back for years. But my grandfather was a very good student, really put his brains into it, worked really hard, did not graduate high school because of the Milchemet Ha'atzmaut, the Independence War. He joined the Palyam. Not a lot of people know about Palyam, but Palyam was the navy of Palmach. Which is important because when my dad was in the Navy in the 1973 war, and when I was in the Navy, luckily no war. When my grandfather studied, became an engineer, and somehow worked his way in El Al, and he became the vice president of El Al.
Can you ask him about reducing the flight costs? Would you mind?
Unfortunately, he passed away years and years ago, but I can tell you this. When my grandfather was the vice president of El Al was still the state's, company rather than a private company, and was doing everything for the Jewish people rather than the Jewish investors. My grandfather had I don't even want to call it luck, but was in the wrong place in the wrong time, I would say, which is during the time that he was vice president of El Al, there were a lot of hijackings of airplanes by the PLO, so he would be involved in basically negotiations, but also in rescue situations in some of the airplanes. But he was also instrumental in bringing Eichmann to trial in Israel. So if people know the story of how Eichmann was brought to Israel, it was under the guise of this El Al was sending a special plane to see if we can start, I wasn't alive, but if Israel and Argentina could have a direct flight path. And it was for Argentina's, I think it was 100 or 200 Independence Day, something big. So they were sending a special plane, and it wasn't a special plane. They didn't know how special it was. It was a special plane that was built specifically to bring Eichmann back. So very few people knew about it, but there was a secret cabinet where they could put him. And very few people were in the know. And luckily for, I guess, the operation, my grandfather was in the know. So he was there with the prime minister and everyone with this idea. So when someone comes for us, we do everything we can to bring them to justice. And that's kind of the lore that I grew up with. For years, I didn't think about my grandfather in that way. He was just my grandpa. You know, just like that person that can be really nice and sometimes annoying and critical. But, you know, as every grandfather and grandmother can be. But in the recent couple years, I've been thinking more about the things that he did that was beyond the family and was really kind of changed everything of how I think about things.
Yeah, it's an amazing Yerusha, an amazing inheritance, that legacy that you received. I mean, I want to publicly thank both of you for the bravery you've exhibited in the past year. I don't think any of us take that bravery for granted. Dean Cypess, in July of 2024, you published an article in Tablet entitled "Why I Left My Faculty Position at Rutgers." You wrote there, "Some news outlets have sensationalized my move, claiming that I was driven out by anti-Semitism. This is untrue. I'm not running away from anti-Semitism, but rather running to embrace the Jewish educational principles that Yeshiva University embodies. And we are the beneficiaries of that move, so thank you. At the same time, you were deeply troubled by the response of the administration to student statements that were anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, or that glorified martyrdom. Can you take us into some of your hardest moments at Rutgers?"
Sure. So I think because I was co-chair of JFAS, I was sort of thrown into a position. I don't really characterize it as bravery because it was a lot of just happenstance, but people looked, I was the one who sent out the group emails, right? So I was the recognizable name. And so when people across the university started experiencing very concerning things, they would email me. And because I was in an administrative position, I knew a lot of people around the university. So just, you know, to give you one kind of, I think, very common example, I know of a few instances of this, but I know that there were many, many more that were never reported and that I don't know about. But very early on, there was an instance of a student in a sociology class who went to her, to an advisor or to a mentor and said, "What the professor is teaching in this class is really disturbing, it's wrong, it's biased, I'm feeling targeted and I don't know what to do." So the mentor, it was on the JFAS email list, so she responded to one of my email threads and said, you know, "Hey Rebecca, we haven't met, what do you think this student should do?" And I said, "Oh, let me see if I can reach out to my counterpart at another school and talk to her and try to figure out how we should proceed." And I think that person did speak to the department chair, who then spoke to the professor, and it was a difficult negotiation. And that particular case got resolved, but not without my colleague feeling like she was opening herself up and having her loyalty to the university and her loyalty to academic freedom being questioned because she had raised this concern that was being passed along to her by a student. So those kinds of really tangled, thorny issues were coming up all year long. And you could say that each one of them, like, okay, so a professor says something inappropriate. It's not the first time that's ever happened, right? But in the aggregate, I think there was just a sense that we were playing whack-a-mole all year, a sense that you never knew where the next problem was going to arise. So then there was a whole episode where one of the kind of campus, a living learning center had its own social media account, and the students who were running the social media account, or maybe they were paid staff, I can't even remember now, started posting this series of Instagram posts explaining the war. They were going to explain the war. They explained the war using these graphics with all lowercase letters, so it looked very innocent. It looked almost childish, and it just had the most terrible, slanderous blood libels embedded in these Instagram graphics
that had this veneer of innocence, this veneer of, we're going to just explain gently what the truth is, really insidious. So that night, one of the Hillel staff members and I stayed on the phone until like past midnight, past 12:30, 1 a.m., going through every single one of these slides and writing this enormous list of concerns that we then sent on to the campus administration. So again, each one of these things were like low-level problems, but they were absolutely relentless. And that was the backdrop for some of the really worrying things. Like when you have an entire, kind of mass rally happening outside of, in one of the quote, free speech zones, where students are, chanting, students and faculty, by the way, chanting in support of martyrdom. And we should all, be willing to die for the Palestinian cause. That's what they were saying. And that means, right, going back to the age of plane hijackings, suicide bombings, all of the violence that unfortunately we're seeing. The scariest moment was no doubt, I think it was October 10th or 11th, when there was a literal death threat against students at the AE Pi fraternity. But again, it was sort of a whole year of like how to work with, and I really thought we could work with the administration to address some of these, to address all of these, like this low-level but consistent pattern of hostility to Jewish and Zionist students on campus. And then, there were these like flare-ups, the death threat, and when a Jewish student had a poster plastered, that had her face plastered all over campus, in her dorm, right? They sort of found her where she was sleeping, that kind of thing. So there were, these kind of scarier moments that were clearer, but I think that those really scary and clearer moments should not kind of, they shouldn't erase this low level, like this sense that it's everywhere. This anti-Israel bias is everywhere, and it was embedded within the university.
Yeah. Professor Davidai, does that resonate with you? I know you were out there early in this.
Yeah, I mean, given my situation and being now the situation I've found myself in, I've been basically tapped into like the entire Jewish community around the country, maybe North America, presumably the world, right? So I get to know a lot about different stories that are happening, and what you're describing is happening everywhere. I don't know if you notice, just this Shabbat, a student at University of Michigan was walking home right after midnight. He got a group of other people came up to him, said, "Are you Jewish?" Not "Are you Israeli?" Not "What do you think about Israel?" Not "Do you support Israel?" Just "Are you Jewish?" A yes or no question. He confirmed that he's Jewish. They pushed him to the ground, beat him, spat on him. This was just happened this weekend. Now, these things are happening everywhere. That doesn't mean that the world is doom and gloom and it's every day like this. Some days, many days, or just nothing happens. Then there are days where a lot of things like this happens. But classes, not every class, you'll have a openly either anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli or anti-American professor, but enough classes. Not every student will have faced someone calling globalized the Intifada, but enough students have. And I say this on the one hand to tell people like it's not always dark and bleak, and on the other hand, neither were the years leading up to the Holocaust, right? 1930s in Germany, we still had bar mitzvahs and brises and weddings and birthdays, and people fell in love and people fell out of love. Like, it's not that every day was the Nuremberg laws. Not every day was Kristallnacht. Not every day a Jew was kicked down and beat in the streets. But enough days like that, and enough Jews experienced that. So for me, it's about zooming out. And it's important to zoom in and experience each and every student's experience, but at some point you also have to zoom out and look at patterns and looking at rules and seeing this is happening at a lot of places, but what's more disturbing to me is that the reaction is the same at all these places, where the Jewish faculty are put in a position, and the Jewish students are put in a position where we have to ask the administration to do something. We have to negotiate, like the word you use, negotiate with the university to do something, rather than the opposite. That the university should be seeking us out, asking, we have a problem, how do we solve it? Instead, we are there to both tell the universities that we have a problem and also push them to solve it. And then if, and very few universities are willing to solve it, but if they're willing to solve it, then they tell us, okay, you solve it, tell us how. It's almost like this crazy situation where we're both, we are responsible both for our victimhood and for our survival. And that's, to me, something that I cannot accept. And that's why I've been screaming. And many of you have seen me scream, but also you can see that I have the ability to be calm and,
You haven't screamed once. You haven't screamed once.
Not
since
yet.
You've been here.
Wait, we'll get
Okay.
there.
Erica, may I just chime in
please.
with one more thing? I think that, first of all, Shai, you just mentioned something that I think we just need to kind of pause over and point to, and that is the convergence of anti-Israel and anti-American sentiment. So we'll come back to that. But there is one other thing that I think was very instructive for me in sort of dealing with the administration at Rutgers, and that is that there is a, quote, research center at the law school at Rutgers, Newark, called the Center for Security, Race, and Rights, which was founded in the wake of 9/11. And despite its title, it seems that its only purpose is to spew anti-Israel, especially, but also anti-American vitriol, propaganda, and so on. And my colleagues at JFAS and I spent many, many words in the past year, but also in years prior, talking to the administration about the very problematic nature of this center. We were not looking for the center to be shut down. We understand that Rutgers is a public university and there are principles of academic freedom as well as the First Amendment to which the university needs to be beholden. At the same time, it turns out the president of the university attested to this under oath in front of Congress in May, that a significant portion of that center's funding comes from discretionary funds from the chancellor of Rutgers Newark. And what that means is that those are public dollars that are going towards, because Rutgers is a public university, those are public dollars that are going towards the support of anti-Israel and anti-American propaganda. And when asked by Congress whether he was planning to shut down that center or at least remove its public dollars, its discretionary fund support, the president said he had no plans to do that. So that's a choice. Right? That's the university making a decision to actively support this nonsense.
And by the way, not just the university, the government, right? When it comes to, and this is something that by the way, I have to tell you, if you met me on October 6th, you'd meet a very different person. I've had to educate and learn a lot of things, educate myself and learn a lot of things since October 7th, and reading a lot. So we have to think about, there's publicly funded, and almost every university in the country, even the private ones, have a lot of public funding for research, through Pell Grants. Like, it's not like when Columbia actually gets a lot of money, and it also gets tax benefits. So, but you have the public funded universities, and there, if you or your parents pay taxes, you have a say, and you should have a say, and you should be using your voice and not waiting for someone to take it away from you. And if your taxes are paying for a professor that is spewing blood libels or publishing blood libels, or a center, then you have a say. On the other hand, when we look at private universities, we might not have a say in actionable say, but we still have a say in moral, what we can say. So for example, if Columbia University received $100 million from some private donor who, in addition to spending money at Columbia, spends money on Hamas, there would be a total outcry. The entire world, not just the Jewish world, the entire world would be like, this is not okay. You cannot accept $100 million from someone who also gives money to Hamas. But when Columbia University gets money from Qatar, that's the exact same thing. They get private money from Qatar that also funds Hamas. Not just funds it, but also like they escape to Qatar to not be killed, right? So there should be a total outcry, and again, not just the Jewish world, but everyone should be like, this is unacceptable. Like, how are we having institutions of supposedly higher education being funded by by one hand that gives money to the university, the other hand gives money to terrorism. There's a lot of things that just do not make sense. And I have to tell you, as a parent, like, forget me as a professor, as a parent, I have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old. Parents are supposed to help their kids make sense of the world. I can't make sense of the world right now. I'm having like a crisis as a parent. How do I explain this to my kid? Well, when I don't understand it. So what do I do when you don't understand something? You fight to change it, because I'd rather fight than have to explain to my kids something that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and you're also fighting for them, right? Fighting 100%. For the
100%.
world that they'll inherit. And so many people in this room, you'll be carrying this fight. And the question is, how prepared are you for it? I want to bring in my mentor and teacher, Rabbi Sacks. I first met...
Wait, what? Your mentor is Rabbi Sacks?
Well, yeah.
You can't just say that in a conversation. It's like, oh. It's like...
I was very blessed to live in London and be his student. Wow. And for all of the years in which I studied with him and maintained a relationship with his family, the only time I ever saw him in real consternation, he had come to Washington, D.C. He had written the book Future Tense, which I certainly recommend as important preparation for this period of time. This must have been, I can't tell you the exact date, but certainly it was 10 or 15 years ago. He saw the writing on the wall. And for those of you who want to see really the genius of Rabbi Sacks and the intellectual diplomacy of Rabbi Sacks, you'll watch the address that he gave to the European Union about anti-Semitism and saying, so we're going back to a place that we cannot afford to go back to. And now that I look at it, he was so prescient. He really had a sense that this was barreling down. And I'm wondering if either of you had that sense. I think we were, so many of us were shocked, and I imagine that he would not have been shocked. So, do you want to go first? Do you mind going first?
Yeah, no problem. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. And I've been public about it, and I blame myself, and I don't know what the best English translation of makeh al chet, like it's just, for me, I should have known. I should have connected the dots. They were all in front of me, but I didn't want to see it. Now, we can talk about why I didn't want to see it, why many people didn't want to see it, why many people still don't want to see it. We have I'm a psychologist by training, people forget that I'm not always fighting for the Jewish people. And we have our cognitive defense mechanisms that blind us to things we do not want to see, that allow us to minimize things, to brush away certain concerns, to say that's an isolated incident, and that's an isolated incident, and that's an isolated incident. Well, guess what? When you take many isolated incidents, you get a pattern. But I didn't see it. And I think October 7th shocked me of what happened in Israel, but October 8th, what started happening in New York City and all around the country was a real slap in the face and said, pay attention. And I actually had a meeting today with the former Canadian ambassador to Israel. And she said about how she has been talking about this for so many years. And it matters her that people haven't noticed. Everyone thought the hate will come from the extreme right, and it's still there. Neo-Nazis are not our friends. But not a lot of people were talking about the extreme left. Barry Weiss was, David Baddiel was, Deborah Lipstadt was, but not many people. And I told her, I'm not angry at people for not seeing it, because I didn't see it. All I want to do is get more people to understand it and act on it.
And also to know where this goes. You know, we've been in the darkest of places not a century ago. We know where this goes
Yes.
if it's unchecked.
And to be fair, I mean, I don't know if people know this. It's still weird for me to say this, but I have a podcast, which is very weird. It's called Here I Am, Hineni. Here I Am with Shai Davidai. And I had someone on, Abraham Hamra, who is a Syrian Jew, was born and raised in Syria. He's a bit younger than me, so his family escaped Syria in the 80s to the United States. And he said this thing that was very interesting to me. He said, if all like the organizations, the ADL and all these other organizations had Mizrahi Jews on their boards, they would have been prepared. Not because Mizrahi Jews are smarter or not, but because they have different experiences. They know what it's like when the hate comes in this form rather than that form. Whenever I meet Persian Jews, Iranian Jews, they're not shocked because they all know that the revolution started in the universities. They all say like they or their parents escaped the Iran because it started in the universities, and then when they got enough power in the universities, it moved to the streets. So I think what we should do is because we're such an extremely diverse people, is tap onto all of our collective experiences, both the pogroms, the Holocaust, the Farhud, from all different types of Jewish persecution, but also Jewish survival and Jewish thriving, to figure out how to best fight back.
Yeah, and what a great unifier that would be.
I have an answer now.
Dean Cypess.
I was buying time for you.
That was really good. So I was tongue-tied at first, partly because I feel like my whole experience of my life, my life is very much filtered through my family, through Judaism, but also really through academia. It's what I know, it's the environment where I'm most comfortable and most happy. And at the same time, it's been very clear in universities for a very long time that this element existed, a kind of, I would have thought, a fringe, kind of radical element. So there were instances of this at Rutgers starting immediately after 9/11, before I got there. But I have a colleague and friend, Andrew Getreyer, he's the former CEO of Rutgers Hillel, and he started his job 2 weeks after 9/11. So at that time, he just wrote recently about, because it was the anniversary of 9/11, going to a meeting of a Muslim student group where they were sort of discussing actually how to blame Israel for 9/11 and how to spin, and that you can draw the line directly, right? Again, it's not a coincidence that Osama bin Laden's anti-Israel rhetoric was resurrected immediately after October 7th, and it started going around through social media, right? But at Rutgers, one of the first incidents that I dealt with through JFAS was an incident of a professor, posting something on social media. This was in 2017. That was, kind of anti-Israel caricature, hooked nose, money bags, the whole schmear. There is a professor at Rutgers who has published a book called The Right to Maim, which is a modern-day blood libel, and it's all about how Israeli soldiers will injure and harvest organs of Palestinians. It's a peer-reviewed book published by
It's
Duke
not only a peer-reviewed book. It won that the year it was published. It won the Women's Studies
National Women's
Annual
Studies Association
Award.
Yes. Yeah, so that's at Rutgers, and then there's the Center for Security, Race and Rights, and on and on. I think the thing that shocked me was the response of everybody else. And I'm still hopeful that there is a silent majority that just needs cover, or they need community, or they need protection somehow in order to stand up and be counted and say, even if we are, liberals in our views, this is not what liberalism is. This is a radical ideology. And it's not who we are. So I keep
hoping, and you know, in private, many more people have come to me and said, I really appreciate what you've been doing, and I support you, and I'm so sorry that this is happening, and I'm with you. But publicly, it's been very hard for those people to stand up and be counted, and that's, I think, that's the thing that's been most shocking to me.
Yeah, that's to me, I would say, I've had many heartbreaks, starting in October 7, obviously, and everything that I've seen. But the biggest heartbreak is the silence, is seeing so many people that I know deep and down inside are good people do nothing, say nothing. And I always say, now I understand how the Nazis did what they did. There were very few Nazis in Germany. If you look at the records, there were very few Nazis in Germany. There were very few Nazis in the universities, like the administrators were Nazis, maybe some professors. But it was good, decent, hardworking Germans looking the other way that allowed the machine to work. And it's good, decent, hardworking Americans looking the other way that are allowing the hate machine to work right now.
I mean, it's got to make you question goodness. It's got to make you say, oh, what does good mean? You know, how relative is that term if putting your head down and choosing not to look? Just as you mentioned, we're also not looking. I do want to change, I want to sort of shift the focus a little bit from outside to inside. Dean Cypess, you are a musicologist by training. I think it's fair to say that you are the only faculty member at YU who has a harpsichord in her office.
Come visit.
Come visit. There's been a
like
lot
King
of...
David. Like King David.
There you go. There's been a lot of musical response to the war, including a powerful Israeli song that went to Eurovision. Can you speak to why music is so important in wartime and how music has been important for you post-October 7th?
So I'll put my scholarly hat on for a second and attend to the first question. Music attests to life, right? Visual art can be animating, and it is animated and it's created by living people, but it's essentially static. Visual art hangs on a wall, or it's a sculpture. It can give the illusion of movement or the illusion of life. Music attests to life in real time. And that's why I think it's so powerful. So I have some dear friends who are part of a string quartet in Israel, the Carmel Quartet, and I have an article that's coming out in Hadassah magazine about them in a couple of weeks, hopefully. I'm still kind of waiting for confirmation, I think, but whatever. So they were the first Israeli classical music ensemble to perform again after October 7th. And at the time, the first violinist, Rachel Ringelstein, was awaiting information about her niece, who it turned out was later confirmed to have been killed. She was one of the Tetzpitaniot who was killed near Nachal Oz on October 7th. But they didn't know what happened to her, if she had been kidnapped or not. And she was the one who said to her quartet, we need to start playing again. I need to rehearse, I don't know, I need to have music. And that gave her, she says, the strength to go and sit with her family, with her niece's parents and siblings, as they were, waiting for news. Yam Glass was her name. So eventually, the quartet realized that they had to go back to performing also. And so they had their kind of regular season that was all scheduled. They didn't sell any more tickets. They just brought people in. And they played essentially the same music that they were going to play. But they started with arrangements of Shirei Eretz Yisrael, particularly arrangements of Naomi Shemer songs. And I think the Naomi Shemer songs have essentially taken on a kind of liturgical function now in sort of granting reshut, permission to one another to sit with music, to appreciate music. They express hope, they express a kind of community.
And then they went on and they played Mozart and they played Mendelssohn and whatever. And the people who have attended their concerts, I spoke to some of their audience members, and they describe not having any clue what the music was, not even really listening to the music, but just sitting together and remembering that there is something outside of the horror, that there is actually still beauty in the world, that there's still community in the world, and that they were together in that community and could sit with that beauty for a few minutes. That's what they needed in that moment. It didn't make all of the horror go away, right? And when they left the concert hall, it was all still there waiting for them. But in that moment, that music attested to life, and it attested to that community. For myself, I have found it very, very difficult to listen to music this year. People who have, learned Gittin and other, classical Jewish texts that talk about music will know that Chazal curtailed the Jewish practice of music following the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And this year, I feel like for the first time, I have understood what that was all about. It's been very, very hard for me to focus on music, to listen to music, without feeling guilty or with a kind of attention span that I normally have. And so that's tough, and I'm not really sure what to do with that. But
The beauty that you need to take for yourself. Professor Davidai, your academic...
Please call me Shai.
Shai.
Okay.
Your academic research examines psychological motivations, preferences, judgments, biases, distortions. I'm actually wondering how your research was affected by the events of October 7th and their aftermath. I don't even know if you have time to do research. You've spent so much time on this.
I unfortunately do not have enough time to do research. Even more painful than not having time, almost all of my PhD students and multiple collaborators completely dropped me and said, we don't want to work with him anymore. So basically bringing my academic work to a halt, and I hope I look young, but I am almost 10 years out of graduate school. So I had a choice, do I go back and just do the work that I used to do by myself? Because I love mentoring, and that has gone, unfortunately, out the window. But I think my education, my research from before has really informed the way I think about things that I see now. So for example, one of the things that I'm pushing for with End Jew Hatred, which is a great organization for Jewish civil rights, End Jew Hatred is for what they call the Unmask the Hate law. They want every city, every state, every university to have a basic rule that says if you're going to protest, you should protest. It's okay, but you can't mask your face. You need to be identified. That law, beyond being common sense, is grounded in many things that we know in social psychology. We know, for example, that when people are disguised, when people are wearing masks, or when people are feel masked by the darkness of night, they tend to do things that they will never, ever think of doing when they are out in the open, right? That's a very basic social psychological principle. All of you know it if you've ever seen a Halloween movie. The whole point of Halloween movies is when you're masked, you feel disinhibited, and that's true. The same thing in social psychology. We know that the individual, when they are by themselves, acts very differently when they are in a mob with 100 more people, right? When we're by ourselves, we are accountable, we're responsible. I would never, ever, think of saying something when I'm alone. But maybe if I'm in a group, I would. So, and I always, when people ask me, what do you think of the protesters? And I say they're very polite when you meet them one-on-one. Right? No one would come to my face and scream, globalize the Intifada. But when they're with 50 other people, they have no problem. Again, that's a basic social psychological principle. The same thing when we act on our own behalf. Me as Shai Davidai, I act very differently than if we take some superimposed identity that we fully fuse our identity with and act for that identity. That's why I've always been scared and fearful of every big movement, every big political party, because I don't want someone else's identity, because I know what it does to people. So I tend to use a lot of the psychological principles that I know of, and I teach and have taught and researched to understand better what I'm facing.
Yeah, I think, I thanked you in the beginning of this conversation for your bravery. I think I owe you another debt of gratitude, because I think all of us are hearing about the consequence of the bravery right here in terms of the shrinking self, of ways in which you have sacrificed for that. And I'm wondering if you can give our students some guidelines for how to join you in the fight. And also, we know that protesters graduate and they go into the workforce. Yeah. As our students will go into the workforce. How do we conduct ourselves in the face of anti-Semitism, especially when you're an employee at a very junior level and maybe really experiencing the discomfort? So take us through the fight, take us to the workplace, and help us out.
Do you mind if I go on a little bit long? Is it okay if I go on a little rant? And how do we feel?
I kind of was hoping you were going to scream because you kind of said that you were.
And how do we feel about Dvar Torah? Is that okay?
Dvar Torah is,
at
YU it always goes down well.
Here's the thing. It's funny to have like an atheist in Yeshiva University doing Dvar Torah. But okay, let's do this. So, he said not the first. Okay. So the way I see it is there are three monumental moments in the Torah where we went from some tribes to a people, a nation, right? First is Parashat Lech Lecha. Abraham is basically told, go smash your father's, well, he's not told that, but he does it. Smash your dad's idols, leave, just start going, right? It's a call to action. And that's the first point where we diverge from the path of history and become something else. But we don't even have a name yet. We're just Abraham's sons, right? Then when Yaakov goes and prepares to meet his brother, and he fights the stranger all night. Some people say that it's an angel. Some people say that he's fighting his own demons. But he fights the stranger all night, and then in the morning he says, "Give me your blessing." And the blessing, it's not really a blessing. It's just a name. From now on, you're called Israel, right? So that's where we got our name. But then the third part, and this is the part that obviously everyone knows, is that in Har Sinai, right? Ma'amad Har Sinai. That's where we got our moral code. Right, so it's not just that you don't just need to be different from everyone else. You don't just need a name, but you also need some moral code, right? That's Ma'amad Har Sinai. And I've been obsessed with the story of Moses and the idea of Moses. And when does Moses become Moses? And we've talked about it a little. And there's many ways that you can say this is the point where Moses becomes Moses. The burning bush could be one of them. For me, the moment where Moses becomes Moses is when he's walking around, basically his kingdom, like he's going to inherit it, and he sees the Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he just jumps to action, right? He doesn't think. In fact, it is told that at this point that Moses is not only unaware that he's Hebrew, right? Because he was born and raised, he was raised as an Egyptian, but he also is unaware that there are Hebrews. He's so sheltered in his own, in the Pharaoh's, in the palace, that he's not even aware that there are these slaves. But he sees a wrong and he just jumps to fix it. He doesn't think, what is the right thing to do? He doesn't think like, who should I email? What petition should I sign? He just does what needs to be done. Now, to be fair, I don't think he should have killed the Egyptian. He could have just beat him and helped the slave. but I'm not going to judge Moses. But then there's another part of Moses. Fast forward, where he comes down from the mountain and he sees the people, the Hebrew people, idolizing the golden calf, Egel HaZahav. What does he do? What does he do? He smashes the Aseret HaDivot. He didn't need to smash them. He could have put them down and started shouting. Right? There was no need to smash. And in fact, when you think about it, this is kind of crazy. Like, he just received the word of God. He's holding the word of God. No one but him has seen the word of God. And his reaction is smashing it. But he did it because he had no other choice. Because he needed to show people, to grab their attention, to show them how severe what they are doing is. To show them how big of an issue this is. Right? When I stood on Columbia's campus and I screamed and I screamed out my pain, I didn't have to do that. I could have talked. I could have just said, here's the problem that we have. But I'm willing to bet my money on it that none of you I wouldn't have been here. Because no one would have listened. Because sometimes the problem is so big that you just have to act. And in fact, we had a precursor of what Moses was going to do, because he said, Lo ish dvarim anochi. Right? Now, we interpret it as, Lo ish dvarim anochi, meaning that, he was, he had a hard time speaking, ish kved peh. But also, Lo ish dvarim anochi is, I'm a man of action. I'm not a man of words. You have Aharon, he's the man of words, and he did a lot of great stuff. The point I'm trying to make is, first, like Abraham, we're all called to action. We can go through the path of history, but we have to act at some point and not accept the fact that we're just like everyone else. We need to act. The second is, we need to be acting not just for us, but for our people, for Bnei Israel. And when I say our people, I mean all of our people. And it's fun, people I'm also fighting for Neturei Karta, which is very weird, because Neturei Karta are fighting against me. But I'm fighting for Neturei Karta, because I know that when a Neturei Karta walks around Brooklyn without the Palestinian flag, they are as likely to get beaten up by any other Jew. So I'm fighting for all Bnei Israel. But the last thing is, we all have to find our way of fighting, our way of speaking up, our way of acting against what we see is wrong. Now, I use my voice. Sometimes I shout, sometimes, as you can see, I speak quietly, but that's my way of doing. Other people do it through music. Other people do it through the legal ways, and they sue places. Other people do it through their business and through their money. There isn't one way to fight. There isn't one way to say, here's something wrong, and here's how to fix it. The only wrong way is to not do anything. Because that's the only wrong way to fight, if you think this will blow off by itself. Now, I will put a little caveat on that, because if you keep doing the same thing and nothing changes, then it's not a wrong way, but might not be the right way. And that's why I tell my colleagues, enough with the petitions, enough with the emails, enough with the strongly worded letters, because no one's reading them. No one cares. If they did, things would have been different. Do you know how many petitions have been signed since October 7th? Do you know how many letters? Hundreds. What have they changed? Nothing. So we need to do more than that. And part of our fight is showing up. We need to publicly show up. Now, I don't really need to say this in Yeshiva University, because almost all of you are visibly Jewish. When you walk around the streets, you're visibly Jewish. But you have to remember, I am not visibly Jewish by some decree. I choose to make myself visibly Jewish. I choose to wear this shirt, right? Even though I'm scared sometimes. I'll have to tell you, like walking from the subway here, I was like, ugh, like I was getting looks. But I was like,
Can we suggest an Uber home?
no. I mean, yes, you can suggest, but you know, if you pay for it, you can suggest pay for it.
Happy
but,
to.
but the whole point is like, we all have to do something, but we also all have to show up. Right, and I tell people, wear a Magen David, wear the dog tag, wear the yellow pin, wear something that shows that you are Jewish, so people would see, because in a way that has become a form of protest. And I'll say just one thing, just because I do want to talk 1 second about my wife. My wife has also been doing her share, showing up in the march. You know, we have a march for the hostages every Sunday, 11 a.m. in Central Park around the reservoir, going to protests, you know, being visibly Jewish. But my wife is a translator. That's her job. She translates Hebrew fiction into English. And after October 7th, for months, she just couldn't work. She had such a hard time working. So what she did was she volunteered her time and said, I'll use my skill. So that book you're going to get one day in October, my wife was actually, she didn't translate it, but she edited the translation. So she was instrumental in, you know, and for months, she would be like sitting at home and crying and really engaging in, I think it's 40 stories of like heroes and incredible stories from October 7th. It wasn't easy for her, but that was her way of fighting back. So you all have to, one, find your way of how you fight back. And when I say fight back, don't misunderstand me. And I mean peacefully, I mean non-violently, but also not quietly. So your way of fighting back. And the other thing is being publicly and openly Jewish. And if I may, and this is how I end, because, and I'm sorry, I told you it's going to be a rant, but I'll stand up and I'll use my voice. One of the things that I've found myself is that I've actually, and I do this with high schoolers, but you know, with everyone, like I have to teach people how to stand up as Jews, right? Because a lot of times, you know, and you know, we're from, like if you see Jews in synagogues, like, you know, we're all, you know, and we're all like this. That's, you know, we cover, like that's how we are, right? But when we go out to the world, like we really, literally, like we need to have a little bit of like IDF chutzpah in us. Like, you know, put our shoulders back. You know, this is the way also that people can see my Magen David. Make sure everyone can see my Magen David. And just stand there. And if someone comes and shouts at me, which I've had that experience in protests, I don't shout back. Because there's nothing that I can say to shout back at someone that will convince them. It will just be a shouting match. In fact, I just stand there. And sometimes in my mind to calm myself, I either sing something to myself, like I would sing Hatikva, or I'd sing like Gesher Tzar Meod, or I would recite something, or I'll think of my kids, but I'll just stand there. You know, just to show, this is me being nonviolent, this is me being peaceful, but I'm not being submissive. I'm not being quiet. Even though my lips are silent, my presence is very loud. And that's kind of like what I want every Jewish person to feel like. Now, of course, doing this alone is scary, especially if you're a petite, you know, person. But when you stand like this with 20 other Jews, it's actually quite empowering, and you feel very, very strong. And I learned this from the Jewish students. I didn't come up with this. I learned this from the Jewish students at Columbia who, on October 12th, on the first protests that we had by these Hamas glorifying people, the Jewish students were standing there for 22 minutes in silence, 22 minutes, which was 1 second for every person who was a confirmed dead on October 7th. So 1,320, back then in October 12th. And just stood silent. Some of them were crying. It's allowed to cry. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to break. You're not supposed to be some sort of like, strong individual. It's actually very strong to show your emotions in public. But they stood there, and they did not remit 1 inch of their ground. And that, to me, was the most forceful show of Jewish unity and Jewish pride and the way for us to fight back.
Thank you. I want to honor the time that we generally conclude.
You shouldn't have invited me if you want to honor time, because,
really to honor the students who go to Night Seder and learn. I mean, they learned from your Dvar Torah, so that's a form of Night Seder for us, but also those who are busing back to Midtown. I hope that everyone in this room understands what a privilege it is to be a student at Yeshiva University. Because your stories, on every level, from the student population, administrators, colleagues, all of the struggles that the two of you have endured this past year have been remarkable, and you've really shown us how to stand taller as Jews in the world. We're here at Yeshiva University. I also want to acknowledge Terry and Andrew Herenstein, without whom so many of these conversations would not take place. Thank you. And I guess I want to bless you to have strength for the derech. We say Tfilat HaDerech. We all know that this is a long fight and it's not over. Who would have thought on day 347 that we would still be having these conversations? So from the bottom of my heart, Toda Rabba.
Do I have 2 minutes? Or is it really?
I think you're taking 2 minutes. I feel that you're taking 2 minutes.
I'm going to take 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to take 2 minutes. I just want to say.
Taking 2 more minutes. I'm also taking 2
Okay,
minutes.
so I'll be very, very quick. But I want to just tell people.
If you do need to leave for Night Seder.
Yes, I will not be
understand.
offended. Leave if you need to. But I just want to say this. One, kol bnei Yisrael aravim ze lazeh. We all have a responsibility. I'm so glad that you're in this university where you're protected from all that hate. But also remember your Jewish brothers and sisters downtown in different universities and ask them, do you need us to show up for your rallies? Do you need us to be there? That's number one. The second thing that I want you to, change something in your mind. We're not fighting anti-Semitism. That's not the fight. We're not fighting against. We're fighting for. What are we fighting for? We're fighting for Jewish civil rights. Because the war in Israel will end. I hope soon. I hope all the hostages are back home as quickly as possible. And by the way, I hope that it will end so there will be no more civilian casualties, even though those casualties are Hamas's responsibility and it's their fault. I still don't want civilian casualties. I hope the war to end. But the war will end. Our fight will not end because we're fighting for something else and something bigger. Raise your hand if, when you go to synagogue, there's an armed guard outside. And keep your hand up if the armed guard is being paid for by the synagogue rather than the city. That is a civil rights issue. That is an infringement on your civil rights. Raise your hand if you went to Jewish day school and you had an armed guard outside. Now keep your hand up if the school paid for that guard. Look around. Again, that is a civil rights issue. When Jewish kindergartners cannot go to school without paying for their own protection, the city or the state doesn't even do that. Remember this one thing. If you forget everything from today, remember this one thing. For 8 years straight, 8 years, anti-Jewish hate crimes have been the #1 hate crime in the city. More than racist hate crimes, more than anti-immigrant hate crimes, more than anti-LGBTQ hate crimes, more than any other hate crime. That is a civil rights issue. So I hope that the war in Israel ends quickly and as favorable to us as possible. But our fight here is a fight for your life. And it's a fight for your children's life. So whatever you do, remember that and you just find your way to keep fighting to make your kids' life better. You don't have kids yet, but when your kids will be born, I hope they will come to a world when I ask them to raise a hand. Yes, maybe there will still be armed guards, but it wouldn't be our responsibility to take care of ourselves. It will be the city or the state or the federation's responsibility. But yeah, thank you.
Thank
2
you.
minutes. Yeah.
Thank you,
Very,
Rebecca.
very quickly. Can I just,
Please.
is this still on? Can you all hear me? So just to respond to the last question that you asked about entering the workplace, I think it is extremely important to, it's not working, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just remember, thank you so much, when you go out into the workplace, when you go out into spaces where you can't count on everyone else feeling the same way that you do, find your community. That's the kind of the start and the end. If you can find your community, find the senior partner who will look out for you, find colleagues. There's secret handshakes I could teach you. We should develop some, right? Whatever, yeah, whatever it takes, find your people, because actually there is more safety in numbers, and there's bravery in numbers as well. It's much easier to be brave when someone else is next to you being brave.
Thank you. May we return to Jewish joy.